Welcome back. Now, Republicans have been trumping Democrats in the early counting of the U.S. presidential election. But as Americans brace for the victor, so is China, whether in trade or in the contest for Asia. China is an inescapable factor for the U.S. Today, we look into all the ways U.S. elections and China are intersecting. And joining us with more insights is Tian Pan, head of product at Prescient China. Basically, it's been said that Donald Trump has won the presidency in the U.S. Tian, going into this new administration in the U.S., how would you describe the current relationship between China and the U.S.?
I think there's no better word to describe it than it being on ice, I guess. Ever since Trump's previous administration, China-U.S. relations have been on the decline, and it's probably at some of the all-time lows that we have seen historically prior to official diplomatic relations being established many years ago. So going forward, probably more of the same, I guess.
I'm actually wondering, Tian, would it have made any difference if Kamala Harris had won this election, considering the fact that the Trump tariffs were kept on board?
Yes, to the surprise of many outside of China, the word on the street in China is actually a Trump victory would have been preferred. Everybody understands in China that because of the ongoing competition for global supremacy, the so-called supremacy, the relations between China and the US are not going to get better anytime soon. But Trump is seen as a more potential transactional president, where there may be some positive surprises in bilateral relations. And that's what many here in China are hoping for. And if history is anything to go by, there is a slight higher probability. But overall, we expect sort of the pressure in terms of tech sanctions and trade sanctions on China to continue from the US administration, no matter who won this election.
Transactional president. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about that. Just about how, negotiations, potential negotiations that could come about in this presidency.
So if we go back to Trump's previous administration, when he first launched blanket tariffs on a bunch of Chinese goods, there were various rounds of negotiations back then, and there was finally at a certain stage the first round of trade deals between China and the US was signed, where China agreed to purchase up to $200 billion worth of U.S. agricultural goods. Agricultural goods, obviously, from states that supported the Republican Party. That obviously never fully materialized as the further tech sanctions and tariffs continued on in China, and never went on to fill their side of the bargain. But with that history in mind, there is a potential for some negotiation. As opposed to the Biden administration over the past 4 years. There's just been continued pressure, tech pressure, additional tariffs on top of the Trump-era tariffs from the Biden-Harris administration, with not really much room for any material negotiation, for any break or any improvement. So it's been a really tough 4 years for China. Mm-hmm. And for some on the ground here, people are potentially hoping Trump will bring a little bit of a different dynamic to bilateral relations.
So, because obviously we know the headwinds that have had an impact on China's economic growth, but China now is on a turnaround and a new growth path. Is there any nervousness that maybe if more tariffs could be coming, that could place the Chinese growth path into a vulnerable position?
Absolutely. So, Trump's election talk was that he's going to slap blanket 60% tariffs on everything imported from China. We think that's unlikely, but you never know with President Trump. So you can see in the stock markets today, it was pretty volatile in China and I guess globally. What this means is that there is a risk for trade impact on China. So if the worst scenario happens, China will likely have lower growth going forward, but we don't believe that is extremely likely. And with all of the policy meetings that's happening in China, we expect proper response from the NPC Standing Committee that are actually meeting this week to counter any adverse effects that will come through.
Okay. That was actually my next question, to see if there's anything that could cushion China in terms of the prepared response for that when Trump actually gets into the boxing ring, if that does happen. And actually talking about that parliamentary meeting, because going into this before the elections, all the talk was about stimulus. Are there any expectations on that from this meeting that is currently happening?
Absolutely. We expect at least some amount of fiscal stimulus. There are wide-ranging rumors of big numbers that's going to come through towards the end of this week and this weekend, specifically after the NPC Standing Committee finishes their meeting. I think the actual number, obviously anything that's announced is going to be something that's going to be implemented for years to come. And with the planning of the meetings for this week, I think the policymakers here are actually well positioned to sort of counter any negative impacts from the US elections and the Federal Reserve rate decision this week. So I think overall we expect positive stimulus announcements. That's going to be a good risk management announcement for the Chinese economy in the face of US election results as well.
And just lastly, as we wrap up the conversation, Tian, you mentioned earlier the chip wars. And I'm wondering if, there is a point where there is a deterioration in terms of relations on that. Do you think that China has built up a good position to be able to withstand any escalation in those tensions?
Absolutely. So I think China, at least the policymakers, are under no illusion that any of the chip or tech restrictions are going to get lifted from the US. So there's been for several years now a massive push for tech self-sufficiency. So we've seen companies, or everybody knows Huawei, they used to make amazing phone products for the global market. They've now come back really strong, not just making flagship phones, but making breakthrough in both chip design and chip manufacturing processes. We are seeing Chinese AI champions coming through, although they still lag the extreme cutting edge products of the West, specifically from the US. We are seeing more and more Chinese companies completely rely on domestic-born technology. So we're not too concerned about the relationship deteriorating, and that's actually where we expect the sort of tech relations to be heading either way. So going forward, probably almost sort of two unicorns, if I can call it, in terms of global tech leadership, if we're heading the way we're heading right now.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time and giving us insight on those relations. Tian, that was Tian Pan, Head of Product at Prescient China.